November 16, 1944. The Hurtgen Forest, Germany. The world has been reduced to mud and splintered trees. Rain, a constant, weeping drizzle, slickens the earth and drips from the skeletal branches of pines. It's a sound that gets into your bones, a percussive drumming on helmets and ponchos that promises only more cold, more misery. For the men of the 28th Infantry Division, the Bloody Bucket, this forest is a green hell, a meat grinder that chews up companies and spits out ghosts. Every yard gained is paid for with blood. Corporal John Kowalski, a medic attached to King Company, lies pressed against the root system of a fallen fir. The air is thick with the cordite stench of battle, the metallic tang of blood, and the sweet, cloying odor of pine needles decaying into the muck. His knuckles are white where he grips the stock of his M1 carbine, a weapon he prays he never has to use for its intended purpose. His real weapons are in the canvas satchel at his side: sulfa powder, morphine syrettes, and rolls of gauze that are never, ever enough. The order to advance had come at dawn, and now, hours later, they are still fighting for a miserable little rise in the ground designated Hill 203. A German machine gun nest, a nest of hornets dug into the earth, has pinned them down. The chatter of the MG-42 is a monstrous, tearing sound, a ripsaw cutting through the air, answered by the methodical thud of American bars. Artillery shells from both sides scream overhead, their passage a terrifying Doppler whistle that ends in a ground-shaking crump, flinging dirt, rock, and fragments of men into the bruised sky. You learn to tell the difference. The German 88s have a sharper crack, a more personal venom. Then a shift in the symphony of violence, a roar from the American line, a surge of adrenaline and desperation. Lieutenant Miller, his face a mask of mud and fury, is up and running, waving his men forward. On your feet, move, move. The machine gun falters, choked by a well-aimed grenade. Kowalski pushes himself up, his boots sucking at the greedy mud, and follows the wave of olive-drab uniforms. He isn't a rifleman, but in the Hurtgen, everyone is a rifleman first. His eyes scan the chaos for the fallen, the crumpled shapes that were his comrades moments before. They swarm the position, a chaotic mess of shouts, rifle fire, and the close, intimate horror of bayonets. The fight is short and savage. When the shooting stops, the silence that follows is deafening, broken only by the groans of the wounded and the ragged, desperate panting of the survivors. The German position is a wreck of splintered logs, spent casings, and bodies. A handful of Germans, boys and old men in Feldgrau, emerge from a dugout, their hands raised high, faces pale with shock and surrender. They are disarmed roughly, their fear a palpable scent in the air. As the GIs secure the position, Kowalski gets to work. He moves from man to man, a grim priest administering his rites. A pressure bandage here, a shot of morphine there, a whispered word of comfort that feels hollow even to him. He's triaging the living from the dying. It's a brutal calculus. Then a corporal shouts from the entrance to the main bunker. "Hey, Doc, got more down here, and you ain't gonna believe this." Kowalski slides down the muddy slope into the cramped subterranean space. It smells of stale sweat, damp earth, and fear. 2 more German soldiers are huddled inside, along with a radio operator. And next to him, sitting on an ammo crate, is a woman. She wears the gray uniform of a Helferin, an auxiliary. Her face is smudged with dirt, her blonde hair matted and damp. But it's her eyes that stop him. They are wide, pupils dilated, fixed on some point beyond the flickering lantern light. She isn't looking at the American soldiers towering over her. She's looking through them. She is utterly, terrifyingly still. The other prisoners are scared. She is somewhere else entirely. Kowalski watches as a sergeant roughly pats her down for weapons. She doesn't flinch. She doesn't even seem to breathe. He feels a knot tighten in his gut. Something is wrong here, deeply wrong. The collection point for prisoners is a captured German command bunker, a slightly larger, slightly less damp version of the one they just cleared. It's a hive of controlled chaos, a temporary island in the sea of violence. Lanterns cast long, dancing shadows on the concrete walls, turning the faces of weary GIs and defeated Germans into grotesque masks. The air is a cocktail of wet wool, cigarette smoke, blood, and the sharp, clean scent of iodine. Wounded from both sides are propped against the walls, their groans a low, constant chorus. Corporal Kowalski works with a practiced, almost numb efficiency. He moves down the line of prisoners, his hands working independently of his mind. He checks for wounds, dabs antiseptic, wraps bandages. His German is crude, a pigeon of commands and questions learned on the long, bloody road from Normandy. Zeigen Sie mir, show me. Wo tut es weh? Where does it hurt? Most of the Germans are sullen, compliant. A few are defiant. All are exhausted. War has scoured the humanity from their faces, leaving behind the same hollowed-out look he sees in the mirror each morning. But his thoughts keep returning to the woman. Lena, he heard another prisoner call her. She has been placed in a corner, away from the men, guarded by a young private who looks as scared as she does. She hasn't moved. She sits on the dirt floor, her back pressed against the cold concrete, knees drawn up to her chest. She watches everything, her gaze flitting from the guards to the medics to the other prisoners. Every sudden movement, every raised voice causes a barely perceptible tremor to run through her body. She is a tightly wound spring, a bomb of silent terror waiting for a spark. Kowalski finishes with a German corporal who has a nasty gash on his forehead. He wipes his bloody hands on a rag and looks over at her. He'd seen a dark stain on the side of her uniform tunic back in the foxhole. In the dim, shifting light of the bunker, it's almost invisible, blending with the shadows and the grime. But he knows it's there. A medic develops a sixth sense for hidden injuries, for the subtle ways people try to conceal pain. The way she holds herself, a rigid stillness on her left side, confirms his suspicion. Finally, it's her turn. He picks up his satchel and walks over. The private with the rifle tenses, but Kowalski ignores him. He crouches down, trying to make himself smaller, less threatening. "Sind Sie verletzt?" he asks, his voice softer than he intended. "Are you injured?" She doesn't answer. She just stares at him, her blue eyes wide and vacant. He can see the pulse beating frantically in the hollow of her throat. He tries again, pointing to his Red Cross armband. "Medic, Sanitäter." He gestures to his bag. "Ich will helfen. I want to help." A flicker of something in her eyes. Not understanding, but fear. A raw, primal fear that has nothing to do with being a prisoner of war. She shakes her head, a tiny, almost spastic movement. "9," she whispers, her voice a dry rasp. "9." Kowalski's patience, already worn thin by a day of death and misery, begins to fray. He has American boys bleeding in the next room. He doesn't have time for this. He points directly at the dark patch on her gray wool tunic. "Dort," he says, his voice hardening. "There, let me see." The transformation is instantaneous and shocking. Her passivity vanishes, replaced by a fierce, cornered animal defensiveness. She recoils, pressing herself harder against the wall, as if she could melt through it. Her hands fly up to clutch the front of her uniform, shielding the spot he indicated. "9," she says again, louder this time, her voice cracking with panic. He can't back down now. He knows she's hurt. Stubbornness, or maybe the deeply ingrained duty to preserve life no matter the uniform, takes over. He reaches out slowly, deliberately, his hand open. "Just let me look," he says in English, forgetting himself. "It's my job." She flinches away from his hand as if it were a hot iron. The standoff hangs in the thick, smoky air. A medic trying to heal, and a patient terrified of being touched. He knows he is seconds away from a choice he doesn't want to make. The bunker seems to hold its breath. The low groans of the wounded, the murmur of guards, it all fades into a distant hum. In this small corner, the world has shrunk to the space between Corporal Kowalski and the terrified German woman. His hand is still outstretched. Her eyes are locked on it, her breathing shallow and fast. He sees the tremor in her hands as she grips her tunic, knuckles white. She is a fortress of fear, and he is laying siege. Ich bin ein Sanitäter, he repeats, forcing calm into his voice, trying to break through the wall of her panic. Ein Arzt, a doctor, let me help you. His words are meaningless. The uniform he wears, the rifle leaning against the wall behind him, the very air of captivity, it all screams a different message to her. He can see it in the frantic darting of her eyes. He is the enemy. He is a man with power, and she is helpless. His patience snaps. It's not anger, but a grim, professional urgency. There's a GI with a sucking chest wound waiting, and a lieutenant with a leg full of shrapnel. He doesn't have time for this silent battle of wills. He has to know the extent of her injury. He has to clear her so he can move on. Let me see the wound, he says, his voice now a low command. He doesn't wait for a reply. He lunges forward, not with brutality, but with a swift, decisive motion. He grabs the collar of her thick wool tunic with one hand and the fabric over her abdomen with the other. He needs to get underneath it, to see the source of that dark, damning stain. The material is coarse and strong, resistant. For a split second it holds, then, with a grunt of exertion, he puts his weight into it and rips. The sound is obscene, a violent, tearing noise that cuts through the relative quiet of the bunker like a gunshot. It's the sound of violation, of something being rent apart. And it breaks her. A scream is torn from her throat, a sound of pure, unadulterated horror that has nothing to do with physical pain. It's a sound from a place deeper than any wound he could possibly treat. It's the sound of a soul being flayed open. She scrambles backward, crab-walking away from him, her boots scraping uselessly against the packed earth. She collides with the concrete wall, the impact jarring her whole body. Nicht, she shrieks, the word dissolving into a torrent of panicked German. Bitte, tun Sie mir nicht weh. Lassen Sie mich. Don't hurt me. Please, don't hurt me. Leave me alone. Her plea silences the entire bunker. Every head turns. GIs, German prisoners, other medics, they all freeze, staring at the scene. The young guard takes a half step forward, his rifle rising, unsure of what he's witnessing. Kowalski remains frozen on his knees, a piece of torn gray fabric clutched in his fist. The raw terror in her voice hits him like a physical blow. This isn't the defiance of a soldier. This is the agony of a victim. He had expected a struggle, maybe a curse. He had not expected this complete and utter psychological collapse. As she huddles against the wall, sobbing, her head buried in her arms, the torn edges of her uniform fall open. And Kowalski sees it. Underneath the ripped tunic is a crude field dressing, a dirty piece of shirt that has been completely overwhelmed. It is saturated with blood, not the brownish red of old dried blood, but the dark, almost black color of a slow, steady hemorrhage that has been going on for a very long time. The wound beneath is invisible, but the sheer volume of blood tells a terrifying story. She isn't just wounded. She is bleeding out, right here on the floor of his aid station. The sight of the blood-soaked bandage is a splash of icy water, snapping Kowalski out of his shock. The woman's desperate cries, the torn fabric in his hand, the stunned faces around him, it all recedes. His world narrows to the wound. The jaded, exhausted corporal who tore her uniform vanishes. In his place is the medic, the professional, driven by a single, overriding imperative: stop the bleeding. He finally understands. Her terror wasn't of him as a medic. It was of him as a man in a uniform, a symbol of the violence that had already shattered her world. The sound of ripping cloth, the sudden, forceful act, it hadn't just opened her uniform. It had ripped open a wound in her mind, triggering a memory of some previous unspeakable horror. He thinks of the stories he's heard, rumors from the few German prisoners who would talk, about the Eastern Front, a place where the rules of the war had been completely abandoned. This wasn't combat fatigue. This was trauma, deep and profound. "Plasma," he barks, his voice cutting through the stunned silence. "PFC Miller, get me a bag of plasma and a battle dressing, now." His assistant, a young private, jolts into action, fumbling in the medical supply crate. Kowalski moves toward the woman, slowly this time, his hands held up and open to show he means no harm. She flinches as he approaches, still whimpering, her body racked with tremors. He kneels beside her, his movements deliberate and calm. He keeps his voice low, steady. "It's okay," he says, first in English, then trying to find the German words. "Ruhig, ruhig, calm. Ich bin Sanitäter. I am a medic. Let me help." He gently reaches for the makeshift bandage. Her whole body tenses, but she is too weak to resist. His fingers, surprisingly gentle for a man whose hands are calloused from digging foxholes, peel back the sodden cloth. The wound is worse than he feared. A piece of shrapnel, probably from an artillery burst, has torn a jagged, ugly gash in her side, just below the rib cage. The edges are inflamed, and it's impossible to tell how deep it goes. It's not pumping, not arterial, but it's a steady, relentless seep of life. She's pale, her skin clammy, classic signs of shock. She's been running on pure will for hours, maybe a whole day. The cold of the forest has likely been the only thing keeping her from bleeding to death faster. As he works, pressing a fresh gauze pad against the wound, the details of her humanity emerge from behind the enemy uniform. The dirt caked under her fingernails, a small faded scar above her eyebrow, the way her eyelids flutter, her lashes dark against her pale skin. She can't be more than 20, maybe 21. A girl from some German town caught in the gears of this all-consuming machine. Her panicked German has faded to incoherent muttering, names, places he doesn't recognize. His assistant arrives with the plasma kit. Kowalski efficiently finds a vein in her arm and inserts the needle, taping it down. "Keep that bag elevated," he orders. He applies a thick battle dressing to her side, wrapping it tightly around her torso. He knows it's a temporary measure, a patch on a leaking dam. He can feel it under his hands. The bleeding is internal as well. The pressure he's applying on the outside is doing next to nothing for the real damage. Her breathing is becoming shallower, her eyes losing their focus, staring blankly at the bunker's ceiling. She is fading. The plasma is buying him minutes, but she needs a surgeon, she needs a hospital, and the nearest one is a nightmare journey of miles through roads that are little more than artillery-plowed lanes of mud. He feels her pulse at her neck. It's a faint, thready flutter, a bird beating its wings against the bars of a cage. He have to get her out, now. "Get me a jeep!" Kowalski's voice rings out, sharp with an authority no one in the bunker dares to question. "Tell the motor pool this is a priority evac, now!" A sergeant standing near the entrance looks from the bleeding German woman back to Kowalski, his expression a mixture of confusion and protest. "Doc, she's a kraut. We've got GIs piled up." "She's a patient, Sergeant," Kowalski cuts him off, his eyes hard, "and she'll die in the next 30 minutes if we don't move her. Is Lieutenant Miller's jeep available?" The sergeant hesitates for a second, then nods and disappears into the rainy dark. In the brutal triage of the battlefield, a medic's word is law. His oath was to the wounded, not to a flag. 2 riflemen help him craft a makeshift stretcher from poles and a poncho. They lift her gently. She is shockingly light, a bird-boned fragility beneath the heavy, blood-stained wool. As they carry her out of the bunker, the cold, damp air hits them. The rain has intensified, a miserable, steady downpour. In the distance, the horizon flickers with the ghostly light of an artillery barrage, the sound rolling toward them a few seconds later like low, continuous thunder. This is the world they have to drive through. The journey is a jarring, mud-slicked nightmare. The Willie's Jeep, its headlights hooded slits of yellow light, claws its way through the devastated forest. The driver, a kid from Ohio with nerves of steel, wrestles with the wheel, fishtailing through ruts deep enough to swallow a man. Kowalski is in the back, crouched over Lena, trying to shield her from the worst of the jolts. He holds the plasma bag with one hand and keeps pressure on her wound with the other. The rain soaks through his uniform, chilling him to the bone, but he barely notices. She drifts in and out of consciousness. In her delirium, she speaks in a soft, low German. She talks of a garden, of sunflowers, of a brother named Klaus. In these fractured moments, the war, the bunker, the torn uniform, all of it falls away. She is no longer the enemy, no longer a prisoner. She is just Lena, a girl from a place with sunflowers who is dying in the back of his Jeep. To keep her tethered to the world, he starts talking. He doesn't know if she can hear him, let alone understand his English, but he talks anyway. He talks about his father's diner in Pittsburgh, the smell of frying onions and coffee, the roar of the blast furnaces across the river that would light up the night sky. He talks about anything but the forest, anything but the war. After an eternity of jarring impacts and near misses with shell craters, they see it. A collection of large, muddy tents, their canvas illuminated from within by a stark white light, the 32nd Field Hospital. Before the Jeep has even skidded to a complete stop, orderlies are rushing out with a stretcher. Their aprons are already stained with the day's work. "What have you got, Corporal?" a surgeon asks, his face grim and exhausted. "Female POW, shrapnel wound to the right abdomen. Severe hemorrhaging, signs of shock. We started a unit of plasma about 20 minutes ago. Pulse is weak and thready." They transfer her to the stretcher with practiced speed. Kowalski watches as they carry her toward the operating tent, a place of bright lights, sharp steel, and desperate chances. He stands alone in the rain, his uniform plastered to his skin, his hands covered in her drying blood. He looks back the way they came, into the black, unforgiving maw of the Hurton forest. He hasn't won a battle or taken a hill. He has only ferried one small, broken piece of the enemy to a place of healing. In the grand, insane calculus of this war, it is a meaningless act. But as he walks over to a water barrel to wash his hands, watching the pinkish water run over his skin, he feels the immense weight of that one life. For a single moment in the unending slaughter, it felt like everything.